it's discussion time. Hiya, my name is Jess, and if you could not tell from that hastily prepared intro, today I am going to be discussing with you Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, a play script by J.K. Rowling, John Tiffany and Jack Thorne. So the Harry Potter play has been out for a little over a week now, and I got my hands on it about 2 days ago and read it in a single 3-hour sitting. I just ploughed straight through it, and ever since I finished reading it, all I've been thinking about doing is sharing my thoughts and feels, and there are so many of them, with all of you. So before I get into the in-depth spoilery discussion, I'm going to give sort of a basic overview of plot with as few spoilers as possible and just give you sort of my general feelings on them. In its most basic sense, The Cursed Child follows Albus Severus Potter, Harry Potter's son, as he gets his hands on a time turner and decides that he's going to try and rectify what he views as some of his dad's biggest mistakes. If you have read the books, you know that wizards who mess with time aren't really very wise wizards at all, and obviously this is going to have all sorts of ramifications, and that's really where the plot sort of starts to thicken. I am so confused about how to rate this book. I really don't think I can give it any sort of star rating, because I don't think I can sum up my exact attitude to it in like 4 stars, 5 stars. There were definitely issues with it, and I think a lot of my issues come to the fact that you pick this up and part of you wants to read the 8th Harry Potter book, and this is not that. For one thing, it's a play, and obviously that new format had a big effect on the storytelling, on the dialogue. That definitely gives the play quite a different feel from the books. And secondly, the main characters that we love so much from the original series have grown up. So they've changed, and they're not necessarily how we remember them from the books at all. There were also some issues that I had with the plot, and there was one issue in particular that I just can't get my head around. But overall, I did find this a very enjoyable reading experience, and I don't think I realised how much I had enjoyed it until literally 2 days later I'm sitting here and I'm still feeling so full of emotion from reading it. I think my biggest piece of advice to anyone that's thinking about reading The Cursed Child is do not go in it expecting to see the next Harry Potter novel, because you'll just be disappointed. In my head, the Harry Potter series and the Cursed Child play are two just separate entities. They're different stories, they're different formats, they're not things that really go together in my head, and I don't think that the Cursed Child for me is as good as the original Harry Potter series, but then because of that impact that series had on me as a child, I don't think any series or any follow-up ever really will be. Overall though, I did think that the play retained the sort of magic that I love reading about in J.K. Rowling's works, and I would recommend reading it. Now I'm going to get into a much more in-depth, spoilery riddled, fangirling, flaily discussion of the plot. So if you have not read Harry Potter and the Cursed Child and you intend to, or even if you're not sure, I really would maybe just click away now and then come back when you've read it so you can discuss. Otherwise this might get hella confusing. The play picks up right where we left Harry and his family in the 19 years later chapter of Deathly Hallows, and immediately you get this sort of sense of the dynamic between Albus and his father. Albus and Harry's bond was for me one of the most enjoyable aspects of the play, and it's one that I'll touch on later, but it was very interesting to see from very early on how much Albus struggles with the pressures of being Harry Potter's son. And I know that a lot of people found him quite whiny early on in the play because of this, but I actually completely sympathised. I imagine when your father is as big as Harry Potter would be in the wizarding world, there's a lot of expectations placed on your shoulders, especially as, from what I've read, Albus is by far the most similar to Harry mentally and also, I guess, physically, from what I read in the books. I loved the immediate introduction to new characters we got. Rose Granger Weasley is just so much like Hermione, it's insane, but she also has a lot more confidence and I think fewer insecurities than Hermione had, and you can tell that she is going to grow up to just be as much of a badass witch as her mum is. I was kind of annoyed that we didn't get to see as much of Rose throughout the play. The way that it was set up in the beginning made it look like we were going to get a new trio consisting of Albus, Rose and Scorpius, but that didn't really happen as much. It was more of a duo with Albus and Scorpius, which I also loved, but I feel like overall the play was quite male dominated with Albus and Scorpius and then Harry and Draco, and I would have liked to have seen more of the women, of Rose and Hermione and Ginny, because I feel like J.K. Rowling has proven that she writes brilliant women, and I just wanted more of a presence from them in the play. Another character that we're introduced to very early on is Scorpius Malfoy, and I absolutely adore this kid. He is by far my favourite new character. He is so adorable and so geeky, and not at all like you would imagine Draco Malfoy's son to be. I was shocked when I heard that rumour that's like circling around Scorpius's birth, the idea that his mother Astoria went back in time, did the deed with Voldemort, and then came back to the present and birthed Scorpius. That's insane. I mean, if there's one thing that's going to be harder than being Harry Potter's kid, it would be being the supposed kid of Voldemort. And I imagine that this would have left, like, you know, a lot of baggage to be carried around by Scorpius. But I think that he really comes across as just such a lovely, kind, humane character, and his humour for me is something that has really saved the play. I thought he was so funny, especially when he was with Rose and Albus. I thought that together they had some really good banter, guys. I also thought it was really great that Albus and Scorpius were sorted into Slytherin together, because obviously there's a lot of taboo, I think, in the sort of Harry Potter fandom about houses. There's a lot of competitiveness between houses, and the first series definitely created a lot of stigma around Slytherins and what it was to be a Slytherin. And I think something that the writers were really trying to put across with sorting both boys into Slytherin, and also with having this rumour about Voldemort surrounding Scorpius, was that people are more than rumours and, you know, reputations that precede them. And I think that's something that the writers delivered really well, and I imagine would be a real, like, sort of treat to watch on stage. As I mentioned in my overview, the fact that it was a script became very noticeable very quickly, just because of how fast things were moving. Literally the second that Albus is sorted into Slytherin, it's the second year, and then as soon as something happens in the second year, it's the third year, which is a bit of a shock, because obviously with the original series you get an entire book dedicated to every year, whereas for the first 3 years of Scorpius's and Albus's time at Hogwarts, they literally only had a few lines, and that was something that was initially quite hard to adjust to, but it was also something that I found myself really enjoying, because it helped me to fly through, and I think this is definitely like a one sitting read, and that really fast pace helped with that. Something that we come back to constantly throughout the play is Albus and his growing resentment of Harry. It really hurt my heart to see how sort of fractured and difficult the relationship between those two was, because you could see how much they cared, but just how difficult it was for them to communicate. And I feel like, you know, Harry in particular was just a really bad dad. Like, I agree, when Harry gave Albus that blanket, it must have been a real big blow to him to hear Albus just write it off as he did. But I think Harry, you know, Harry was the adult in that situation, and some of the things he said to Albus, like wishing he'd never been born, is just unforgivable, and it was something that I really found hard to get to grips with. This isn't the Harry Potter that we know from the books. There were several instances throughout the play where I thought that Harry stepped really out of line, his conversations with Albus being one of them, another of them being the way that he talked to Professor McGonagall. I mean, oh my god. I mean, how dare he say that she doesn't understand because she's never had children, when she cared for him, and she obviously cared for him, Harry himself, so much throughout the entire series. Oh, it just angered me so much. His character felt really off throughout, and it wasn't like how other characters like Hermione felt a bit changed, because I feel like Hermione's change was a little bit more realistic. She was a lot more grounded than she was in the book series, and I feel like that's sort of a natural progression for someone like her as she, you know, becomes an adult. But Harry's character just didn't feel at all representative of who he was in the books, and that really irritated me so much. That is not to say that I didn't at all sympathise with Harry at any point. I feel like the flashbacks that we got to the Dursleys were so harsh, when you see really details that we never saw in the books about how awfully Harry was treated by the Dursleys, and the fact that he still has nightmares about them in, you know, in his adulthood, was something that I found so unbelievably heartbreaking. But, you know, you're still a really bad dad, Harry. I mean, come on, come on. So as I said, the plot really gets going when Amos Diggory shows up, and he's like, bring my son back. I know you have a time turner. I want you to go back in time and bring Cedric back. And immediately I was like, whoa, where did this come from? Because if we work it out, it's like 19 years later, plus 3 because Albus is now in the 3rd year, so that's 22 years. And then Cedric died in 4th year, which is another 3 years, so it's 25 years. Looking at this logically, Cedric has been dead for 25 years, and it's now that his dad shows up and asks Harry to put stuff right. This was just immediately suspicious to me because, I mean, whilst the books and films did kind of present Amos as, you know, a bit of a fool at times, I think he was a reasonable enough man to know that Harry, it was not so simple as for Harry to go back in time and just bring his son back. He would have known, being a ministry worker, just how many ramifications and repercussions a wizard travelling through time can have on really serious events. And of course we know now that Delphi probably used the Confundus charm on him or something, but for me that was definitely the first hint that something was off. The second hint being Delphi herself. The way that she was with Albus and the sort of way that you could see her trying to get on his good side, you just knew that something was off. And the thing that really cemented that for me was when she just suddenly presented the Polyjuice potion and was like, oh, here, we can turn into Ron, Harry and Hermione now. Hold on a second, if you have read those books, you know that Hermione literally spent a month brewing that Polyjuice potion, and you're telling me that Delphi just had like a stash, you know, just with her. And not only that, but she somehow had the hair or fingernail or whatever of Harry, Ron and Hermione to put in it. I mean, seriously, Albus? Seriously, Scorpius? Did neither of you not even think for a second that this was slightly suspicious? That I guess that objectively to Albus, who had not lived through that and maybe didn't have a great understanding of the effects of time travel and stuff, saving Cedric seemed like objectively a good thing. But it was just so stupid. So then they sneak into Hermione's office to find the time turner, and we get this scene that starts out really funny and ends up really disturbing with Albus trying to distract Hermione. Let's have another baby. What? Or if not another baby, a holiday. His knee-jerk reaction was to tell his aunt that he wanted another baby. I mean, he really set Ron up there. So that was really funny. And then he ends up kissing Hermione, which is so disturbing, and I was glad that Scorpius was the voice of logic and reason here and was like, I'm just going to ignore how much you kissed your aunt, you weirdo. But what really annoyed me about this scene was that they get into Hermione's office, and where has she hidden the time turner but in a bookcase riddled with riddles? And this just annoyed me so much because surely after the Philosopher's Stone experience, when 11-year-old Hermione got past Snape's like riddle extravaganza with all the potions and stuff, she should have known that riddles are not impossible to crack for, you know, a smart or logical person. I don't get why she would have even like put the riddles there, why she would have even given these people a chance to answer the riddles and get through to the time turn. It just seems so Hermione. Hermione always thought of every precaution, and this just seemed like she was being really reckless, which was annoying. I had a similar issue with Ron. I feel like throughout the play he was presented as a bit of a fool and a bit of comic relief, and I strongly disliked that. We just didn't get to see some of Ron's most redeeming qualities in this play at all. We didn't get to see his loyalty or his bravery. Hermione is always cited as the character that is the best role model, and I think certainly she's a brilliant role model. She was one of my role models, but I think that Ron's really important because he shows that you don't have to be like the destined one like Harry was, and you don't have to be like super smart and textbook intelligent like Hermione was, but you can still have an effect if you're a good person and if you're loyal. You don't have to be these two extremes to be essential, if that makes any sense. I think I just went on a long Ron Weasley rant, but I will defend Ronald Weasley until my dying breath because I love him so much, and I just do not feel as though he got the representation that he deserved in this play. So as soon as they get hold of the time turners, it's just this like crazy onslaught of alternate realities, which were intriguing but also absolutely terrifying to read about. Definitely the one that had the biggest impact on me was the alternate history of when Voldemort ended up winning. That was just so terrifying to see how dark things truly would have become had he won. It was crazy. I genuinely couldn't believe what I was reading. Like, they had Voldemort Day and Umbridge, that bitch, is back as the head mistress, and they have Muggleborns in the dungeons that are constantly screaming. Oh my god, that bit when that girl comes up to Scorpius to ask him to take her to some sort of Voldemort Day ball, and she just like casually wipes Muggle blood off of her shoe. It was just so disturbing. Although it's so amazing to see how Hermione was just being like a total bamf, and how her and Ron had like teamed up for the resistance. But one of the biggest shocks of the script for me in this alternate reality was when Scorpius turns around and Snape is there. Snape was there, and he was still on the side of the resistance. He was still fighting for Dumbledore despite the fact that Dumbledore had lost and Harry was dead. And I just found that incredibly touching, because I'd always wondered what would happen if Snape hadn't died. You know, would he be openly a good guy, or would he say, okay, that's my part done now, I'm not going to fight anymore, I've done what I wanted to do, I've done my duty for Lily. And it just made me feel really content to know that he had kept up the fight. However, I also think it brings up the issue again of characters feeling quite off from their book selves, because the Cursed Child very much presents Snape as a very heroic person. Like, the second that Scorpius sees him, you know, he considers it's an honour, he thinks it's amazing that Albus carries his name. I think there's actually stage direction at some point where Snape is described as standing like every inch the hero or something, and I felt kind of conflicted about this. I mean, yeah, he certainly did heroic things, and they probably wouldn't have won the Wizarding War without him, but I did not think for a second that he was a nice person. He was really cruel, and despite doing good things, he did them out of a very selfish motivation. I think that everything he did was just to kind of feel less guilty for letting Lily down. I don't think anything he did was for Harry, or even necessarily for the cause. I think that it was all quite selfishly motivated, and I also don't think that he would have accepted his death quite as comedically, really, as he did in The Cursed Child. There was just something about the presentation of him that felt quite idealised, and I wasn't sure how I felt about that. I still found that entire alternate reality section really interesting though, and it was a really emotional moment for me when Ron, Hermione and Snape all end up sacrificing themselves and literally, you know, having the Dementor's kiss, which is described as the worst possible punishment in the books. And I think they really illustrated well to the audience the dangers of meddling with time, and I feel that it sort of raised the stakes with the play a lot more. I also love that in all of the alternate realities, Hermione still existed, and I love their reaction in the dark alternate world to be being told that they have 2 kids, and that really emotional moment when they chose to die together with the Dementor's kiss. It just warmed my Hermione shipper heart. And another thing that I really enjoyed while all of this was going on was the way that Harry and Draco teamed up to save their sons. I thought that that was so lovely. I was really anxious at the beginning of the play when I sort of worked out the way that they were going to take things with Draco on this whole sort of redemption storyline. Don't get me wrong, I love a redemption storyline, but I feel like Draco has always seemed kind of irredeemable. And J.K. Rowling herself has said that Draco is not a nice person, so I was really worried that again this was going to feel like another example of when characters just didn't feel true to themselves. But I feel like, you know, hints of how Draco was in the books were still definitely there. There were still the sort of little quips and the kind of remainder of the schoolboy jealousy that he felt towards Harry. Still all the things that made Draco Malfoy recognisable as an antagonist, but you could also really see the way that his wife's death and the way that Scorpius had affected him, and ultimately I feel like his redemption storyline was a convincing one because you could see how he matured. It wasn't just like a complete like 180 turn. You could see how the things in his life had really changed him into this different and much nicer person. Also, Draco's sassiness in this book was just so much how I imagined it being. Keep up, old man. We're the same age, Draco. I wear it better. I did love that. Anyway, so as soon as we get a little break from all this parental drama and the crazy Voldemort alternate reality, we get this other bomb dropped on us, and this for me was the part of the play and the plot device that just frustrated me the most. And that is the revelation about Delphi being the daughter of Voldemort and of Bellatrix Lestrange. Her storyline was just so crazy. I mean, first of all, the fact that Voldemort has a daughter just felt like something so fan-fiction-y I just couldn't. And second of all, the fact that Bellatrix was her mother and that she was birthed just before the Battle of Hogwarts, or no, Bellatrix is dead just before the Battle of Hogwarts, is just, I've seen so many people trying to work out this timeline of exactly when Bellatrix would have been pregnant, and I don't understand how that happened. Like, what could drive a woman to sleep with Voldemort. He's insane. He's completely driven by his quest to just dominate the wizarding world. But yeah, you're telling me that at some point during this mess, he just found time to go and frolic off with Bellatrix and produce a daughter. Does Voldemort even have a penis? It's a question that when I got into this fandom when I was like 7 years old, I never imagined myself asking. But what frustrates me more than anything about Delphi's storyline, more than the fact that it makes no logical sense and doesn't really match up to any timeline, is that it's just not necessary. She doesn't need to be there. You didn't need this plot line with Voldemort's daughter. I feel as though if they'd focused solely on Cedric and on trying to bring back Cedric, and they just like revolve the entire thing around the issues of tampering with time, they could have created a play that felt a lot more genuine and a lot less fanficky. The Delphi plot twist just felt like some sort of thing thrown in to shock the audience, and I feel like the play would have felt a lot stronger had it not been there at all, to be honest. I didn't enjoy that aspect of the play, and that's what dragged it down for me. I liked most of the other things. I had some issues, but overall I really enjoyed it, but I just could not wrap my head around that aspect of things. I just don't know why she exists. I suppose one thing Delphi does do is help lead to what I think is like the most emotional part of the entire play, which is the flashback to 1981. Firstly, I was really impressed with how resourceful Albus and Scorpius were in like having that blanket message. I'd love to see how they do that sort of thing on stage where you have Harry and Ginny reading it on one side and Albus and Scorpius writing it on the other side. I imagine that they must have used split screen quite a lot during this production. There's just so much that I'm trying to visualise, but I can't because you don't have like a novel-sized book explaining it action by action. But ultimately it leads to all of them going back in time to 1981, and after the entire crazy thing with Delphi goes down and Harry transferring himself into Voldemort, we get the scene that impacted me most emotionally, and that is the scene where Harry has to watch his parents die, knowing that he could save them, but at the same time knowing that he can't save them. And we had a similar moment earlier on the play with Albus, Scorpius and Cedric when they see Cedric, and Cedric actually saves them, and they're so close yet they know that they can't help him. And I think that those two moments where all of those wizards have the potential to save a life, but they know that they can't save a life without potentially destroying millions and thousands and trillions and billions of others, is just really, really emotional. I can't imagine how awful it must have been for Harry to like have seen it, like to have had the visual for the first time after sort of hearing it and having like flashes of it for so many years. It's just a list of stage directions at the end of that about him falling to the ground and about the sound of the scream like whooshing through the audience and the stage rotating. I can imagine that it must be something very powerful to watch visually. And then you see Hagrid like wading through all the house rubble to pick up baby Harry, and I also really loved that moment. I love how they got the start of the original series into the play somehow. I thought that was wonderful and very nostalgic and moving, and I was really, really glad that they put that one small scene with Hagrid in there, though I would be really fascinated to see how they managed to sort of create the illusion of the giant Hagrid on stage. So from that point things really start to wrap up. You get the father-son reconnection with both Harry and Albus and Draco and Scorpius. One of my favourite aspects of this play was the importance that the relationship between a father and a son plays in it. J.K. Rowling places a lot of importance on the role of mothers in her works. You have Lily Potter, who by sacrificing herself saves Harry's life, and you have Molly Weasley with her amazing moment at the end when, you know, she kills Bellatrix out of that, you know, love for her children. But she doesn't really explore fathers as much. I think in the original series it's Lily who Harry always looks to for comfort, but it's James who makes Harry feel as though he has all of these expectations on his shoulders and all this stuff to live up to because of how many people tell him that he looks like James and how he's a bit like James and how much Sirius and Lupin told him that. I just think it's really interesting, and I loved the closure that we got with those two in the end. I thought that was really, really wonderful. One final point that I haven't touched on that I am going to touch on is romantic relationships with the next generation. So ever since I've read Deathly Hallows and I read about the existence of Rose Granger Weasley and Scorpius Malfoy, I have literally dreamed about the two of them getting together and somehow, like, you know, uniting those two family trees. And initially I was really excited when that started happening with the play, when you could see sort of the roots of Scorpius's crush on Rose. But somewhere along the way, something really weird happened, and I ended up just completely shipping Albus and Scorpius. I just got this feel from them that there's definitely more romantic than platonic. I mean, I've read J.K. Rowling's platonic male relationships, you know, I've read the relationship that Ron and Harry have, and I feel like that was infinitely more platonic to that between Albus and Scorpius. And I was genuinely convinced that right at the end, J.K. Rowling was just going to drop a little hint that, you know, they kind of had some feelings for each other. And I was genuinely surprised when she didn't, and when they carried on with just the Scorpius and Rose storyline. And I was also kind of a bit disappointed, because J.K. Rowling has hinted at having gay characters before. She's said that Dumbledore was gay, but she's never really openly said it, and I feel like she did a lot with having a Slytherin be a protagonist in this play. And I also feel like it would have done a lot if she'd had an LGBTQ character be the lead person in the play. I feel like that could have had a big effect on people. And I know that had a big effect on people because as soon as it ended, I googled Scorpius and Albus and the fan art was already flooding in. Reading this has also left me with just like a burning desire to see The Cursed Child, even though it's literally impossible to get tickets because they're just so dang popular. Like, from all of these stage directions that I've been reading, I can just imagine that it's so amazing visually, like with the bookcase, with Hermione's bookcase, and with jewels. Like, can you actually imagine seeing a real duel happening with like the flashes of light and fire coming out of it, and the transfigurations? I'd love to see how they do the polyjuice potion on stage, like whether they have trapdoors or smoke, or I don't know. I'm so like intrigued by it and how they bring this story to life on stage with special effects. I know that this review has sounded a little bit negative in places, but that's just because, you know, I'm going to be tough on it as it's a Harry Potter book and Harry Potter means so much to me. But I did genuinely enjoy it, and I do think that it's wonderful, and I think it gave me a lot of closure, if you know what I mean. Like, I'm not aching for that little bit more of information anymore. I feel like I have that information now, and I feel a bit sad, but I also feel quite relieved that it's out and that it's in my hands and that I've read it and that I know it now. Do you know what I mean? I will see you next time.